The president at the time was Mugabe. The year was 2002. There were a lot of European farmers being forced off their land. Quite a few of them were killed. They were losing everything. And the British government, under the terms of the agreement that set up Zimbabwe, had the right to come in and restore order. And they did send a flotilla of ships, but at last minute they turn around and sail away. Even today, no one really knows why they did it.
Today we've got Michael Ponder joining us here in the Bronte Studios. It's fantastic to have you, Michael, one of the founders of the New Zealand olive industry, the author of New Zealand's most revered book on olives. If you start in an olive grove in New Zealand, the Bible for that is the good oil. Here is our man who produced the good oil many years ago. He's also produced some best-selling books, conspiracy, thriller range, and we'll talk about those today. Michael, it's fantastic to have you join Exceptional Kiwis Out of the Shadows today. I understand that you were raised in Wellington, is that right?
Yep.
Your paintings depict a rural background, yet you were raised in Wellington. Where's your passion for this rural that's exposed in your paintings come out having been raised in Wellington?
I guess there was always the desire to be rural. My mother was born on a farm in the outbacks of the Marlborough Sounds. When I first started painting, I did what most people do when they start, and that's paint landscapes. My wife said to me one day that there was a cattle drive being done through Blenheim, which is quite unusual. She said, you should go and there may be something interesting for you to paint. So I did. And there was the stockmen on their horses, which I took some photos of. And that was how the country thing began. But I did get to know a chap that owned an outback station in Marlborough. They did all their work on horseback. They never owned a motorbike or anything like that. They tanned their own leather. They made their own beer. I had a Toyota four-wheel drive, and I used to follow them around and take lots of photos. And that's really how the series of the musterers began.
It's really been your signature in your artwork, hasn't it? I think it's taken you to the point where you've even been involved with Dry as a Bone, the company with the jackets that are so pronounced in your artwork. Have you partnerships going on with Dry as a Bone?
We did do. They actually approached me when we were living part-time in Australia, and they wanted some artwork done, which I did, and that artwork was used in billboards that spanned motorways in Japan. So that was pretty exciting. And I did have an involvement with the company for a couple of years. Most people think of Dry as a Bone as an Australian company, but it is actually a New Zealand company. And the chap that started it, that invented the way of waterproofing the canvas, set up his factory in Auckland. He was always short of money. And an investor came along. It was the chap that owned Pears Soap in Australia. And he said, I'd like to invest in this, but you've got to do that. You're going to have to shift to Australia, which is what he did.
Wow. So he came up with the concept of tanning the canvas that way and making it waterproof.
The guy that started it was a seaman. And they used the old sails off the ships, the canvas from the sails. And he experimented until he came up with this way of waterproofing it.
More Kiwi ingenuity, Mike, that's incredible.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think your father has a fascinating story, which I'll just touch on. I don't want to make it too much about your dad, but your dad was an architect with the New Zealand government, I understand. Am I correct in saying he designed and developed the bases, the houses that we use down in the South Pole for our exploration? He thought if we turn our coal store technology to get lamb over to Europe, if we reverse that, rather than keeping the cold in, we'll keep the cold out. And he built them on the Wellington Wharf and took them down there.
He designed Scott Base, and it was pre-built in Wellington. And then they took it to bits again and numbered every bit to take it down to build it. The Americans were so impressed by the New Zealand base that he got a job in Washington overlooking Antarctic buildings and development. And as a show of gratitude, they've named a mountain after him in the Antarctic called Mount Ponder.
Oh, how fantastic. It keeps the family name going.
tried to talk the New Zealand Antarctic people into giving me a trip down so I could see this mountain, but they weren't too forthcoming, unfortunately.
Wait till the Labor government's back, then you'll be good. It must have been, for you as a young boy with your dad working in Washington, it must have given you some visions on what you could actually do, how you could live your life and be what you wanted to be.
I guess there were three of us boys, and I know my parents always encouraged discussion on politics and doing things. Both my other brothers got their doctorates. My older brother's become very famous in his field, and he lives in Australia. My younger brother's also been an artist for the last 40 odd years. But my father wanted me to be an architect like himself, and he was quite gutted when I chose to go for more of a commerce-based life after a few years, and when he saw what we were achieving, I guess he was pretty happy with that.
There was a big gap in your life that, as far as I can see, just on research, it seemed to me that you got into art and you're self-taught as an artist when you're in your 30s and you would have left school in your late teens. So what did you do in those 10 years in between?
We discovered fairly early on when we were married, we bought a house, did it up and sold it, and made a bit of money on it, so much so that we did it again and again. That built up the capital that we would use later on when buying vineyards and things like that.
So you bought your first 30 hectares of land in about, 1987 or 1986. You planted olives. The first person to commercially plant olives in New Zealand, 1988. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, the property you're talking about, we called Ponder Estate. We bought 80 acres with the idea of growing grapes, but we also wanted to grow olives as well, because we had some unusual shaped areas on the property because of a stream that went through it. We thought the olives would be really good, but also it was quite exciting to try something different. At that time, there were olives growing in New Zealand, but most of them had been grown from seed. And because you grow them from seed, you don't get a true cultivar. And the actual olives themselves often didn't have the oil content or the flesh content that they should have. So when we decided to grow olives, we imported young plants. We got a special grant to do this from Israel, because Israel was the world leader in producing new cultivars in olives. And we brought in a number of varieties. We planted them. They did very well. We set up a nursery so that we could take cuttings, because if you take a cutting from an olive tree and grow from that cutting, you will get the identical cultivar. So that's how it all started.
Are those varieties still in production today?
Absolutely. Barnea was the main one, and that was the main one in Israel that they based their industry upon as well. Fruits from about year 3, it has big fruit, very easy to harvest. They grow tall, they're not spreading, so they're ideal if you want to shake them with a mechanical shaker to get the fruit off. And they have a high oil content. So, yeah, that's what we planted, that's what we grew, that's what we made the olive oil out of. And I think the success of the olive oil industry in New Zealand started when we took our first bottles of olive oil to show to the International Olive Oil Council. They were so excited to get this first olive oil from New Zealand that they tested it and then tested it again, because they couldn't believe the quality was as high as it was. And they were publishing a book on the world's 100 top olive oils, and they actually stopped the production so that they could include us in it. It also had the top 15 olive oils, and we were in that top 15. That's what started this whole interest, not only for New Zealand, but also for Australia.
So you really are the godfather of oil. I know today still it's the book that people go to. You sold the Olive Grove in about 2002 and you started focusing a bit more on your art, I believe. Is that right?
I'd always been doing art ever since we came to Blenheim, and we were in Blenheim 10 years before we bought the land. That was full-time art. The beauty of having the winery was that each year when we brought out our wine, we had a different painting on the label. The paintings went international. We did a limited edition print of those paintings. It not only helped promote the wine, but it certainly promoted the art as well. So the art was always there. On the estate, we had a tasting room where people could taste wine. They could also taste olive oil. They could, in the season, actually watch the oil being made. But we also had a gallery where the paintings were, and my wife also had a whole flurry of other stuff that she used to sell there. And it was very popular with the tourists. And it was a pity that after we sold it, they closed down. We sold it because I was really crook at the time, and the doctors said, basically, you can't continue like this. I was in hospital all the time with heart problems that they didn't seem to have a cure for. And so we decided that we should live a bit longer and take life a bit easier, which is what we did. But I still kept painting and then started writing.
Your writing
books,
was a passion your whole
novels.
life. In your younger life, you wrote a book called Strike, a novel, and sat on it for 30 years, as far as I understand. All the editors bemoaned the fact that it was based in little old New Zealand and it would never take off. So that leads me to the next point. You then decided to write a book on a grand international scale and point the finger at the royal family of England with the conspiracy theory, which was just stunning, Michael. Went from one extreme to another.
When I first wrote the manuscript for Strike, it did get turned down on the basis that who's interested in New Zealand. And they said, basically, what you've got to do if you want to be a successful writer is write something that has international appeal. I gave it a lot of thought, and I thought so many people write about the President of the United States, be it fictional or real, and other famous people, but I thought I'd have a go at the royal family, and it turned out to be most interesting. And it's also interesting now I've done 3 books in the series, how many people actually think there is an element of truth.
I was about to ask you this exact question, Michael, and I'll quickly outline the premise for the viewers today. The premise is that when Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, when that was being overthrown and Ian Smith was the Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, he contacted the English government. They were sending some frigates to help, and then at the last minute they were turned around. And the conspiracy theory is based on why were they turned around, and it opens up the theory that the Queen Mother had invested heavily in President Mugabe and the diamond mines. That was the start of the conspiracy.
The president at the time was Mugabe. The year was 2002. There were a lot of European farmers being forced off their land. Quite a few of them were killed. They were losing everything. And the British government, under the terms of the agreement that set up Zimbabwe, had the right to come in and restore order. And they did send a flotilla of ships, but at last minute they turn around and sail away. Even today, no one really knows why they did it, except me, and I wrote a book about it. I put it down to interference by the Windsors on the basis that they had too much to lose if the interference went ahead, for reasons that you've got to read in the book.
Yeah, mate, fabulous book. Just for everyone out there, Windsor, Windser, Windsor Conspiracy. Fabulous book. Best-selling in 15 or 14 countries, is that right?
It sold very well. The problem is to get it into these other countries, you really have to have someone battling for you, such as a literary agent, and that's what I don't have.
I know that it was translated into Hungarian and it was sold in Hungary, and I understand that you've even had different people talking to you at different times of turning the series into a movie or a mini-series. Is that correct?
I can't do anything without an agent. I need an agent, and when that happens, we'll be able to pursue those lines.
So your whole life has been based around the arts, hasn't it? You've been very involved in the arts, and that's growing your love for writing novels. It's been a pretty interesting life. What do you attribute that to? It's no mistake that someone keeps coming up with the same outcomes, success. What do you put that down to for your success?
Oh, God. All I can say is this, that I've always had the attitude, better to have tried and failed than not to have tried at all. And I must say that I know so many people who moan about their situation that they have in life, but they've never been prepared to go that single extra step further forward that may in fact lead to a change in what they do, because they're possibly a bit scared to. But that's always been my attitude, and we've made money, but we've also lost money. Looking back, I'm 81 now, and I really do have no regrets. I'm pleased that we attempted and did what we have done. My wife often says to me, why are you wasting all that time writing a book with not much income from books, as any author in New Zealand will tell you, when there's more in the art? But it is just the pride and the satisfaction of knowing that you have done it. And when people read it and email you excited because they've loved what they read, it really does make it all worthwhile. So not everything's about money. It is equally nice to have some money, but that's not why you do it.
Because when I look at your career, your life, it strikes me that you haven't ever put money first. It strikes me people that pursue the arts and pursue their passions and stuff, they're never really pursuing money. They're living out what they feel they need to live out. And what you've just said to me confirms that. So you put that first and the money comes, really, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Can I just tell you how the painting started? When I was at college, I was very good at art. In the seventh form, I helped teach third form art. So obviously there was always an art bent there. I won a scholarship to go to some tech art school thing, which I never took up. But a friend of mine that was learning to paint showed me what he was doing. That led me to follow suit. I tried with brushes, failed miserably, and then I tried with knives. I've got some here. I'll hold. So there's a large one and a small one, and that's all I paint with. I don't even own a brush. Not knowing how to use them, I developed my own technique. As the years went by and that technique developed, a number of other artists started copying the same technique. If I had gone to art school, I would never have learnt this technique because I would have been taught to follow techniques that are already tried and proven. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it was just one of those flukes, being self-taught and coming up with something unique. It made my paintings different. We talked about the Stockman earlier on, but my paintings I put in as least as possible. I like to leave as much as possible to the imagination of the viewer. If you have a photo hanging in your room, once you've seen it, you've seen it. There's nothing hidden in it. It's just all exposed. But in my case with people, by covering by their faces being blacked out or the fact that they're back on or whatever, leads the interpretation to the feelings of the subject to the person who's looking at it. And I think that they don't get so sick of it as a result.
Mate, I don't think there'd be a New Zealander that wouldn't know the painting on the right-hand side of you there in the screen. There really wouldn't be a Kiwi worth their salts that wouldn't recognise your artwork. I've read a fair bit about your artwork and I understand that your palette work is unique and you came up with that developed style all on your own. And I think what's so interesting about that, Michael, is you've identified that when you go to university, sometimes you're just limited by what other people know and you just become another one of them. Some of the great people we're talking to are really self-taught, and you're just another fantastic example of that, a person that's carving their own way in life, which is awesome. You say there's no regrets, which is fantastic. I understand you might have another book coming out.
Yeah, so I've written the 3 conspiracy ones. The new one, hopefully it'll be out later this year. It's a rewrite of the book I wrote many years ago called Strike, but brought up to date with the current political situation in New Zealand. It's a political thriller. Only half of it is set in New Zealand, half is set in England. One of the things that is important when you write novels is that the places you write about, it's really important that you've actually been there and witnessed, seen and smelt those particular places. My books cover many different locations. Fortunately, we've been to all of them. One thing about having the wine was that it did require a lot of overseas travel to wine shows and customers and so on, which was good. But I must say that after we did sell Ponder Estate, the last thing we wanted to do was travel anywhere. You can actually have too much of it.
Good olive oil's always got its place in life. Hey, it's been fantastic. Through all of this, it was really interesting. I didn't realise about you that you'd done your hard yards in the renovating properties, selling properties, buying properties. It's really fascinating that so many people we're talking to are underpinned in the early days by doing well with property decisions. It's such a big part of the Kiwi psyche. And You've made some fantastic property transactions by the sounds of it. Is there anyone that in particularly stands out for you, Michael? I've got a real passion for property.
We've had some wonderful properties, and the one we're in at the moment is really beautiful. I do have a story. When we decided to shift from Wellington to Marlborough, partly because we had relatives down here, but also because we'd already bought land in the Marlborough Sounds, which we'd planted in pine trees. And every time I flew over to do anything with the plantation, the number of times you'd leave Wellington on cold, wet weather, get halfway across the Cook Strait, and you burst out of the cloud in the beautiful blue sky and sunshine. And being an artist, you must remember, I was doing full-time art at this stage. We came down on a number of occasions to look at houses, and we used to always stay in a motel in Springlands, the Middle Park Motels. Opposite there was a beautiful property set on 2 acres with a big villa set back in the trees. It had a tennis court. I used to say to the real estate agents, that's the type of property I want. But because I was an artist, they would take me to places with stained glass windows, and it wasn't what I wanted at all. And they also said that you can't buy that particular property because it had been in the same family for 3 generations. On one trip, a real estate agent turned up, and he said he'd only just started work in Marlborough. I told him what I wanted. I pointed to this property across the road, and I said, that's the sort of place I want. He said, I don't even know who owns it, but I'll go up the drive and see if they're interested in selling. And he did. He knocked on the door, and they said, it's interesting that you should come because we've just had a family meeting. My husband is sick. We need to divest ourselves of this large property and get something smaller. We've had a family meeting with our children, and they're not interested. Perhaps Mr. Ponder would like to bring his family and have morning tea with us, and then we'll discuss selling. And so we did, and we found that we had a lot in common, and they sold the property to us. It was called Willowmead, and of course it's now been bulldozed, and it's where the Springlands Lifestyle Village is, which is a massive development in Springlands.
What an incredible story, Mike. I've always said that real estate agents, they're limited so much by what they know, they think they know. And then the new ones come in and they're not limited by anything, so they just get on and do it. And you've confirmed that story. That's fantastic. What a great way to finish the podcast. So I appreciate your time as well. It's been a real pleasure to meet with you today and to hear some of your stories and to know a little bit about the man behind some of our most iconic paintings, which is really what I know you for. I did identify you because of your art. And from that, I've learned that you are an exceptional New Zealander and your story deserves to be told. So it's fantastic to have you here. Thank you for taking the time. And I wish you and your wife all the very best in the future. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.